Amelie's Investigation, Part 2. January 9th, 2009, morning. Today we drive to Cologne. Not all of the gathering, only Antoine and two chosen guides along with myself. Many people have fallen away since the funerals last year. The closeness of so much death splitting apart rather than uniting the community. Antoine has been livid. I bought a new iPhone 3 to make sure whatever I write can be emailed. If it's anything like the gathering, technology will not be allowed. January 9th, 2009, evening. Yggdrasil House is far from prying eyes, more a castle than a simple dwelling place. All parapets and arches in a Germanic style. I can feel the energy here like a pulse beneath the ground. The Chosen was there to greet us. Isolde Liebenzell, an older woman with cropped, short grey hair and a severe demeanour. She is tall and imperious, and she makes you feel utterly insignificant. There are many people here from other gatherings across Germany. They take pleasure in speaking German rather than English around me. Chosen Liebenzell introduced them as my fellow aspirants, those who align with the Blessed Ancient and are being considered for the Ritter der Dämmerung. Antoine and the guides are not staying in the main building. They've stripped me of almost all my belongings and left me with a frayed grey tracksuit and several cheap t-shirts. As expected, they took my phone, but did not find the one I hid in the sole of my shoes. I found one of the only places with a signal in the woods and buried it here. I plan to return and add notes when I can. January 10th, 2009. There's an absence of good food here. The meals are meagre. A crust of bread, a sip of bitter tea. The others consume without complaint, their eyes reflecting an emptiness I can't quite place. Hunger gnaws at me, but I channel it into focus. Perhaps deprivation is meant to sharpen the mind. Maybe that's the lesson. Antoine's gaze follows me everywhere, a shadow that clings persistently. I observed him today attempting to speak with Chosen Liebenzell, only to be curtly dismissed. The tension in his posture was evident, fist clenched at his side. His animosity toward me has deepened. It's palpable resentment that simmers beneath the surface. He watches me during shared breath sessions, his eyes burning with jealousy and something darker. I can feel the hate seeping through the spaces between us, a toxin contaminating my focus. We aspirants are being removed to the chapel tomorrow for the next step on our journey, and I'm sure it is this that incites his frustration. Later I saw him staring at me from across the room, and he quickly changed his face to that dead smile of his and nodded. I returned it. We both know how little respect we have for one another. I don't understand why he insists on pretending. Maybe the lie of congeniality is so central to who he is that he just can't stop dancing, even when the music has stopped playing. January 11th, 2009. The air around Yggdrasil House seems thinner. The walls are wrong. It's as if the building itself breathes. Corridors that should be short stretch on endlessly, their lengths fluctuating depending on the time of day or perhaps my state of mind. I found myself walking down familiar hallways only to arrive at unfamiliar rooms. Doors that should lead outside instead loop back into the house. No one else seems to notice. The other aspirants move through the labyrinthine passages with purpose, their expressions vacant, yet determined. When I attempt to bring it up in conversation, I'm met with blank stares and dismissive smiles. I know they speak English, but they just seem so determined to shut me out. Shadowed corners whisper secrets with voices too faint to comprehend, yet they're impossible to ignore. They ebb and flow like the tide, surging when I'm alone. At times I catch fleeting glimpses of movement just beyond the periphery of my vision, a flutter of fabric, a silhouette dissolving into the dark. Antoine has encouraged me to explore the house. Perhaps he believes I'll lose myself in its winding corridors. I've tried to stick to the main parts that I know, but earlier today I found myself turned around. I heard Celeste. I heard her talking at the end of a long hallway. The walls were adorned with frayed paper, the colours muted by age. As I pressed on, the whispers grew louder, an overlapping cacophony that set my nerves on edge. Just as the sense of unease was beginning to bloom into genuine fear, a man appeared ahead of me, tall and composed. He wore attire suggested a higher standing within the house, and he spoke to me in perfect French, his tone measured and calm. He advised me to stay within the corridors that make sense, not to stray into places that defy logic or understanding, and most importantly, not to listen to the whispers. He continued past me, and I turned to watch him go, but there was nobody there. I've not seen him since, but I follow his advice. January 12th, 2009. The Blessed Ancient and his Damarong do not leave the lower levels of the chapel where we've been performing the breathing ceremonies. I can feel them below us, powerful, ever-present and demanding. It has been a long day on the cold stone, finding alignment within the spiral. I'm so hungry. They are giving us less and less food, and I can feel the lack of calories affecting the clarity of my thoughts. It is hard. January 14th, 2009. I found the library today. 2 stories high and packed with heavy tomes. A room straight out of a fairy tale. Where there were no shelves or books, there were paintings. Incredibly lifelike portraits. Each featured a different face, but all shared common elements. The same weathered gorget encircling their necks, the same glistening breastplate, the same robe. I walked through admiring them, taking in the determination upon each face. Whether a man or a woman, they all looked toward the same distant horizon with determination in their eyes. There was a wicked scent of lingering rot, mildew, and decay, like the contents of the books were diseased, or rats had died in their multitudes behind the dust-covered shelves. I pressed on and discovered a hall filled with thousands upon thousands of childlike drawings, pinned haphazardly to the walls. I cast my eyes around the room and realized that they were thaumatropes. If you took any 2 images and stuck them together and flipped them rapidly, they would look animated. It would look like the branches were swaying. It was an insane labor of decades. I reached out to touch one of the drawings and heard a noise from behind. I turned to see an elderly woman sat upon a stool, cloth wrapped tightly around her eyes. She mumbled incoherently in what I assumed was German. Her movements were erratic, almost desperate. Her left arm was stick-thin, emaciated and crooked, a childlike hand clutching a crayon that scratched out the silhouette of the tree upon like a piece of paper. On her right side was a portrait, the same magnificent imagery from the rest of the gallery, but in the process of being drawn, painted by her right hand, where gnarled fingers gripped a paintbrush. I began to speak, and she dropped the paintbrush and crayon and pushed herself off the stool. She stumbled toward me, mumbling and rambling, and I stepped back. Panic gripped my core. She embodied the madness I've been skirting since all of this began. Her idiot genius mortified me, and I turned to flee the gallery. I could hear her rambling and babbling as I fled through the shelves, and it stretched out like the rest of this fucking place. I needed to put myself as far away from that woman as possible. When I finally found the door and fell out into the hall, a group of aspirants were lounging near the entrance. I could feel them staring at me as I fled down the hallway. I didn't care that I showed them fear. All I could hear was the voice of that old woman babbling, and I knew that she wanted me to stay. More than anything else, I know that she wanted me to join her. She wanted me to pick up a brush and join her in the dark. January 16th, 2009. The Blessed Ancient emerged from the lower levels of the chapel today, and all else faded into insignificance. In the doorway he stood, a vision of androgynous perfection, tall and statuesque, his face bearing the smoothness of polished marble. Crimson robes draped over armour polished to a mirror sheen, breastplate and gorget reflecting the light in blinding brilliance. He never once opened his eyes. I felt a surge of pure devotion, an almost gravitational pull. My surroundings blurred, and only the blessed existed in that moment. It embodies the pinnacle of our pursuit, a fusion of the divine and the mortal. Even from the distance, it was magnetic. I should not have seen it, but I was coming back late from the perimeter, from the feigned run that I used to copy my notes, and I knelt from the tree line to watch. The Damarung led a procession of heavily sedated individuals into the chapel, men, women, even children, all in a stupor and guided by firm hands. They are not of our number. Their faces are unfamiliar to me, devoid of the vacant zeal that I've come to recognise around Yggdrasil House. I had to hold myself in place, resist the urge to step forward from the tree line and kneel before the Blessed. When he stepped back finally within the chapel doors and they slammed shut, it was like my heart had been stopped once more. And I was torn apart by relief and despair. January 18th, 2009. Antoine approached me yesterday after dawn alignment, extending an invitation to a session with the French gathering. His tone was courteous. I didn't trust him, but it felt good to talk to someone in French. And I agreed, hoping to confront this tension that we had head on. We met in a secluded clearing, the air thick with the scent of damp earth, and began to align. With there being only 4 of us, the atmosphere was easy, and we began running through trust games. Basic breathing exercises with movement and an element of trust to them, like catching a ball between breaths. Simple things that made me drop my guard. There's a sense of peace in the spiral. The hate that I'd felt from him was gone, replaced with an easy sense of calm and joy. It led me to believe that this was a potential reconciliation. He rested his arm against the thrown stump at the centre of the makeshift spiral and spanned me around, before inviting me to drop stones with my eyes closed. It gave me small delight to see them land beside his finger and wrist, seeing without sight. I took his place and he did the same, and then he waved the 2 guides forward. I was so relaxed that it took me a moment to see the breeze block that they carried. A huge, heavy thing that they struggled to lift. Antoine held my wrist against the log, and too late I realised that the joy he was feeling was simply anticipation of this moment. I lost track of the breath and fell out of the haze that I was in. Antoine was strong, a squat little man with a powerful upper body. I could smell his rancid breath as he held my arm in place. He told me I deserved none of the honour that I was getting, that I was a fraud. The guides held the breeze block above my hand. It was shaking. They strained to hold it. I was fighting to get free at that point, and he told me that those who would join the Damarung should be strong, that if I was truly one with the breath, this should be a shared pain, that I should barely feel it. I managed to turn and slap him. I scratched at his face. My hand slipped free from his grip and overextended past the edge of the stump. Without a sound, the guides dropped the stone. The crack of bones and rush of wetness did not hurt. There was a second between it happening and my eyes finally looking down at the unnatural angle. How the back of my left hand was touching my elbow. And that was when the whimpering dredged up from my throat. shock had protected me for but a moment. But that passed, and passed quickly. A sharp, searing agony clawed its way along my nerves. I tried to stand and fell back to my knees, instinctively reaching forward to balance myself and feeling faint as my dangling hand waved back. Antoine leaned in, his face inches from mine. Stroking his wrist, I knew he was crowing about how I'd lost the breath. How if I was as good as they said, as good as I thought, I should have been able to limit the pain. He left me there, cradling my shattered wrist, the guides following him without a backward glance. I don't remember how I made it back to Yggdrasil House, alone and in so much pain. I remember passing out on the threshold, but then I woke up in an infirmary. An on-site doctor was tending to my injury, resetting and binding the fractured bones, giving me guidance in broken English on how to take care of it. The infirmary was well equipped, each cabinet stocked with an array of medical supplies that seemed excessive for a place promoting spiritual wellness. But then, given the supposed wealth of those in attendance, it made sense. The number of beds, less so. It reminded me of triage rooms in movies from the Great War. Beds spaced evenly against each wall, but why would they need so many? I spent the day in an empty ward, the silence pressing in from all sides. The doctor did not return to check on me, and while there was nobody interested in visiting. As night fell, a chill settled on me and I could not sleep. I was too angry at Antoine, and too angry at myself for falling for his deception. Small windows poured what little moonlight there was into the room, and no matter what I did, I couldn't get warm. The sheets were too thin, the bed too hard. I wanted to get up, but I was exhausted. I heard it before I saw it. The whispers, the muttering in the dark corners. The sheets upon the empty beds around me appeared to swell, like wind was being blown beneath them, before flattening out into all too human shapes of all different sizes, short and tall, childish and adult frames that did not breathe. Shadows stretched out from every sheet, twisted inhuman forms that leaned toward me at the end of the room. Chattering, urgent, begging. They wanted something from me. They needed it. I closed my eyes and pulled this thin sheet tight with my one hand. I was crying in the half dark, listening to the dead, when I heard the drag of cloth against the floor, and forcing my eyes open saw sheets being dragged toward me like the shells of snails. There was nothing I could do. My body locked up, and I felt them skittering up the side of the bed, placing their dead hands upon me. The closer they got, the further away their whispers became. It was the breath that saved me, as those wraith claws began to scratch at my flesh, and ice-cold palms stroked my neck. I found its rhythm, and the spirits recoiled, as if repelled by it. Their murmurs began to be drowned out, and a new word flowed across the room, across the beds that still held shadowy forms. Balamara. Balamara. The whispers ceased abruptly. Balamara. The sheets rose and fell, replaced by a sudden, oppressive silence. His footsteps were drumbeats that cracked the tiles. He did not hurry, but he cleared the room in moments. A presence of such weight that the moonlight seemed to shine upon him alone. Balamara, the Blessed. He stood at the foot of my bed, gorget and breastplate stained with age, robe covering it tattered but no less magnificent. face divine, lips set with heroic determination. Long red hair spilled over a band of gold that wound across his forehead. Tall, beautiful, demanding my devotion. He robbed me of speech. All I could do was breathe as he breathed, and hope that he recognized the purity of my devotion. His eyes were closed, and upon the lids were the tattoos of intricate branches, the same designs I'd seen in the gallery, the same ones that I'd seen in my own sketches and in the windows of that crashed car. The patterned spider webbing across alabaster skin. It was only a fraction of a second that I lay before this demigod, unable to look away. The shadow of passing clouds creeping across his brow. But it was an endless second. The second before you hit the ground, before the bullet hits, before the dogs rip out your throat, and before the angels take you to your rest. With unfolding horror, I knew that he was judging me. I was torn between the desperate need to look away and the complete inability to do so. Locked between horror and terror. And that is when the lids of the blessed's eyes began to part with agonizing slowness. A creaking sound that echoed off the walls. That reminded me of the cracking of my wrist. Something at the back of my mind snapped then. A fracture in my consciousness. And darkness took me. I woke to daylight streaming through the infirmary windows. The doctor commenting on how well I'd rested. There was no discussion of the previous night's events. Some truths are best left unspoken. That afternoon, I sought out chosen Liebenzel. I recounted Antoine's actions, expecting some concern. Instead, she regarded me with detachment. Cruelty is not a vice here, she stated. It's the domain of the strong. Her words should have incited anger, but instead they resonated within me. Strength is paramount and only the resilient ascend. The blessed has judged me worthy, and I am awed in his presence. I want to inspire that same awe in Antoine. I want to show him what cruelty truly is. January 2009. I am torn between who I am and what I am becoming. I have been dulled here, my edge is fading. I was always so confident, but here, it's like my will is siphoned off, sucked out. I don't even know the date anymore. Our food is getting less and less while our breathing sessions become longer and longer. I barely feel anything. Why am I here? For Celeste, for my art, for the promise of what I could become? I've spent so long telling myself lies that I have no truths anymore. The blessed ancient is truth, and the king we serve is truth. I know that they offer me a chance at true greatness if only we surrender to them, if I give them the devotion and the potential within me. But we're all victims of arrogance here. The Germans, Antoine, even me. Maybe that's the point. Maybe our flaws make us malleable and we confuse blind ignorance for confidence. The Damarung are spending time in our sessions now. They watch from the sides, and their presence forces us to go deeper into the breath. They're hooded and robed with sashes of red. One of them moves like Celeste, I'm sure of it. The battery is low, both in this phone and in my mind. Her responses become short after this for some time. She spends many of these entries merely recounting the length of her sessions and how she is keeping an eye out for the Damarung who looks like Celeste. Whenever she walks out after dark, she sees Antoine periodically in the distance watching her. She no longer dates her entries. January 2009. I asked to meet with chosen Lebensal to discuss my progress. I need to progress. I can't stay locked in mediocrity. I expected refusal. I've seen her rarely this past week, but she'd not only invited me to meet with her, she has asked me to do so in the lower levels of the chapel. A pair of damarang opened the huge wooden doors for me that led to the spiral stairs, and I descended. This was my first time beyond them. The underchambers were large and old, older than the rest of the house. Frescoes worked into the stone were chipped and broken, whatever they depicted long, long gone. I met with the chosen on a balcony that overlooked what looked like a great Greek amphitheatre. It was disorientating to see it several stories below and think how deep we were already. Uneven stone steps formed a half circle, and I felt my heart lift when I saw the blessed was being tended to. His robe tied around his waist as a cadre of attendants brushed lacquer upon his chest, and even this high I could see cracks upon the flesh of his back and his shoulders. A tall woman threaded strands of her long hair into a needle that she used to sew these cracks closed, while a bald woman next to her cut them loose. Liebenzel approached, speaking to me of the necessity of renewal, that the Blessed's power cannot be contained indefinitely within one vessel. 10 years for some, 30 at most, and even then it must be cared for constantly with the rarest of unguents and the strangest of needs. And that is the truest role of the damarang. They are the hunters, the seekers ever vigilant, hunting down the next suitable host and preparing it for their master. The blessed ancient and its brethren have given near 10,000 years of service to a true king and to a true god, and it's the truest hope of the damarang that they will be granted elevation and a chance to do the same. A rare thing that has happened but a few times across those long aeons, but a dream for all who offer service. I watched as the woman sewed more of the cracks closed with her hair, and asked the chosen when I could hope to join the knighthood. She shook her head. The aspirants who would attempt ascension that evening had spent over a year at Yggdrasil House, she told me, preparing themselves and learning the mysteries in readiness to sacrifice that which they cared about. She expected it would take longer for me to be ready, for me to be prepared. I lacked boldness, she said. I did not thank her. I simply turned and left the chapel, seething. But on the way out, I saw Antoine watching me from the tree line and made a decision. I refused to be constrained by their hierarchies and rituals. Tonight I plan to take control. Tonight I plan to find Celeste. Final entry. I am rotting, dying. By dawn I will be his. Music holds it back, heart-shaped box, our song, humming and humming breaks the breath and breaks the hold on me. I am fading. This is the last of it. This is the last of me. I knew Antoine would follow me into the depths of the chapel. I knew he would want to expose me creeping and spying. It was dusk when the aspirants were led away from the rest of us, when those few who were ready to face the blessed ancient's final test were taken into the depths. A few hours later, there were no guards, no damarang watching the doors. Liebenzel had been cold, but she had also been clear. There were no guards because there was no need of them, for any who ventured below would need to be bold. Moonlight cast patterns through the stained glass windows as I descended the subterranean depths, each step echoing with purpose. The descent stretched long, far longer than the other day. Roots wound through the walls like veins, cracking through soil and stone alike, until I finally came upon the mezzanine where I had spoken with the Chosen. Far below, the aspirants stood beside people, those who I had seen being led into the chapel a little over a week ago. They were swaying, docile. The Damarung fanned out across the full half circle of the amphitheatre, with the blessed ancient at the centre standing straight and glorious. Before them, chosen Liebenzahl gripped a lectern tightly and rasped out words that were not German or English or French or any language that I had ever heard. The syllables were wrong, guttural, and so deep they carried a bass that vibrated in the platform beneath my feet. Antoine was behind me far quicker than I expected. I turned and his gaze locked onto mine, and I bolted. He intended to expose me, to elevate himself through my downfall. I had hoped that he would follow, but it all still rested on a knife edge. I could not let him catch me. I stumbled on the stairs and slammed into a pillar, my broken wrist taking the full weight of it and bringing tears to my eyes. I could hear him running down the stairs, down, 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 and down more. Liebenzahl's voice growing louder and louder in that damned language. I turned and expected to be in the amphitheatre, but instead found myself hurrying through a cave that rounded out into catacombs. He was so close, right behind me. I was slow. I was tired. I was hungry. I turned to look, and my body collided with a door that had not been there a moment before. I fell into the wide amphitheatre, and Liebenzahl did not pause. The aspirants did not react, and neither did the Damarung. Antoine followed me inside, rushing in with glee. I pulled the kitchen knife from within the sling as he reached for me, and I stabbed the blade into his abdomen. He slipped over in shock, so I stabbed him again, and again, until my hands were slick. Eventually, his screaming caused Liebenzahl to pause. I looked toward her and said, I cared about him. I cared that I get to see him die. He is my sacrifice. Liebenzahl's expression remained impassive, but she gave a near imperceptible nod. Around me, the other aspirants moved behind their loved ones. I had not seen the chains around their necks until now. I moved behind Antoine, and in the place of a chain, I raised the blade under his chin. The Blessed stepped forward, and the chant began. Balamara, Balamara. He approached me first, ascending the stairs with that terrible, unnatural mass that rocked the ground. He knelt. His nails were long and thick, painted in gold. His fingers slight and gentle as they reached out to lift Antoine's face toward his. And then the Blessed Ancient laid a gentle kiss upon Antoine's lips. A small thing. And Antoine began to thrash. He began to struggle. I stepped backwards and watched as his body jerked even as his head was locked in place by the impossible strength of Balamara the Blessed. I heard his screams. They grew distant, stretched out, swallowed whole. And then in my lungs I felt Antoine's scream. I felt it setting my chest aflame with every breath, and around the room I saw others shuddering in that same ecstasy. The Blessed did not turn. With one hand he gripped Antoine's head from jaw to eyes and stepped backwards, dragging the lifeless body with him. All around me, the aspirants dragged blades across the throats of their loved ones. There were no tears. There was no hesitation. Behind chosen Liebenzel, I saw that curtains had been parted, and she motioned me forward. I followed the trail of blood to her, and the Blessed stood off to the side, holding Antoine's corpse like a broken toy. Chosen Liebenzel guided me between the curtains to a small room full of candles, its walls covered in ancient obsidian carvings of twisted spirals. I realized they were trees seen from above. From the walls, 1,000 faces stared down at me, lacquered and perfect. The shells of those the Blessed has worn before being given a place of honor here. We have always known who you are, the Chosen whispered. But I had no time for fear, because that was when I saw Celeste. I saw my sister half submerged in crimson soil, beautiful and grotesque. A twisted sapling grew from her chest, the bark of it fusing seamlessly with her rotting, cadaverous flesh. The branches bore fruit that resembled distorted organs, each glistening with a viscous sheen. Her eyes were hollow, oozing an amber sap that trailed down her cheeks like tears. Liebenzel motioned to the sapling, and I plucked a fruit. I didn't think before biting into the cold meat of it. A rush of metallic sweetness flooded my senses. And for the final time, the falsity of the reality I had been living in was ripped from my vision. The grandeur of the chamber dissolved into squalor. I saw the aspirants for what they were, gaunt, starving, eyes hollowed by despair. I witnessed them feeding their companions to blessed Balamara, whose jaw unhinged grotesquely to devour them. The air was thick with death. And I saw Celeste's memories. I saw her standing upon the steps, smiling, beside Melody, who swayed in the same drug stupor as those who had just been murdered in this very hall. I saw as Celeste offered her daughter to blessed Balamara with serene devotion. Her child, my niece, waking as the Blessed reached down and devoured her screams. Guilt pierced me, a regret, a realization of my absolute and utter neglect. I'd scarcely thought of Melody, of her laughter, of her innocence. She was a distant echo overshadowed by all my own ambitions. Whether it was my own hubris or some glamour, it doesn't matter. I let the death of this beautiful child be nothing but a footnote. Celeste had felt it too. I could see her give up, the rush of joy and the rush of pleasure in her face tainted by the wickedness of her actions, and when she partook of the fruit, I watched as she choked on it. I saw the truth of the blessed ancient. I saw the reality of him. And I saw so keenly that he wears the flesh of men as a mask, but it's so much more than that. He wears the dreams of humanity. There's no rationality, no thought or plan that we as a species can comprehend. This cult, the stories, the ceremonies, they're as much of a costume as the skins he steals. He is unknowable, his plans unthinkable, and the scale of it all so terrible it will strike us dead to even try and fathom it. The weight of countless screams echoed in my mind, the collective agony of those consumed by Balamara over millennia. I hear Celeste crying out to me, but I will never respond or reply. We will never be together. I'm not a knight, I'm not a servant. I'm nothing but a limb, an extension of his will. Liebenzahl stood beside me unchanged, her cool demeanour, if anything, even more pronounced amongst the madness and the gore. Through the haze, I saw other ceremonies, years upon years upon years of them, and Liebenzahl unchanged in the midst of the madness and the chaos, timeless in her detachment. A true servant of the first king, whose name I now know, and in the knowing of it lose all sanity and self. I was never the artist. I'm not even the canvas. I am paint. Pigment to redraw reality to his design. I can't remember the song. The words are gone. I can't remember my name. Amelie's final words are the body of the email to her mother, which she used to attach all of these notes to. It's simply, "Mama, forgive us." Her mother never read them. The cult or people attached to it told her that Amelie was a drug addict and had died, and the mother, still grieving so hard for her other daughter and granddaughter, believed them. It was the only way that she could keep her sanity. When Chris reached out, he framed his email as being an exploration of Amelie's life and legacy as an artist, which was honestly a genius piece of kindness that probably helped the mother rationalize some things, but no matter, she sent them across to him. But Amelie's story doesn't end with that last entry. Those may be her final words, but the photographs show her as a young woman, a sister and niece posing in front of an art gallery, all big smiles and happiness. And Chris knew her, and I know her too. Chris saw her watching him from the side streets and in the shadows. She was in his house. I've seen her from the window of a Belfast bus, staring at me with cold eyes, and I've seen her shuddering in the rain alongside others of her kind. She's still out there, and I know that before this is all over, I will see her again.